15 minutes. Next up, we've got Jeremy McAnally. He is a recent addition to the team at Intridia. He's based in Alabama, which, again, hopefully is warmer than where many of us are. Michael Buffington built an automobile in his 15-minute break. That's impressive. So Jeremy has launched more open source projects than about anybody I have ever heard of. And several of us have actually moved into Rails core, including the Rails templates. And the one that he's going to be talking about now, I assume, is how to upgrade from Rails 2 to Rails 3. So don't forget, if you want to ask a question in the chat, please preface it with Q. And here we go.
Yeah, I'll do my best to actually answer questions. I'm going to break the vicious cycle of time usage here. So, my presentation was largely supposed to be about why, but I think the guys kind of covered that a lot more than I expected in the first two presentations, just from a technical perspective. So, I'm going to be partially making the business case and the technical case, but it's going to be a lot less code heavy. And so since that I figured probably wasn't going to take quite as long, I'm going to cover some of the how. And I'm not going to get really in-depth into it because it's sort of a per application procedure that you have to go through, but I'm going to try to generally cover some of the things and, as Ben said, go over the Rails upgrade plugin that I wrote. So, why? A lot of people have been asking this question, why in the world do I even care about upgrading to Rails 3? They're largely thinking from a business perspective, why waste the money to pay my developers X dollars per hour to upgrade when our Rails 2 app works perfectly fine? And it's a valid question, it honestly is. So I've broken it down into sort of three very high-level questions, I guess. So performance, as Yehuda has remarked numerous times, is a very important goal of Rails 3. And a lot of effort, I think, goes into Ruby apps to get them more performant. So anything that we can add to that to make that easier is, of course, a welcome addition. And from a business perspective, it means you're spending less money on hardware, you're spending less money optimizing your applications, you're paying for less developer hours to make these things work better. And so if you can just sort of drop this in and do a little bit of effort upgrading it for all of the other reasons and getting this as a bonus, you can't really argue with that. So from a technical perspective, the refactoring that they've done will greatly reduce a lot of the hacks that were required for certain patterns. So dropping in a test framework, like Yehuda remarked earlier, is going to be a lot easier than having to hack test unit and hope that Rails additions don't break anything. I know that when I wrote Context, I wrote it using, I think, Rails 2.2 or 2.1 or something that didn't have a lot of the new testing stuff that they had added. And when I went to upgrade it to 2.3, it broke some things because Rails had added their own test helpers that had conflicted with names and placements of my stuff. And so it wasn't a problem. It just was an unexpected default that I ran into. So I think a lot of the APIs they're exposing and a lot of the changes that they've made for modularity are going to reduce the amount of hacking and maintenance that's going to go into that sort of stuff. So a lot of the new features are great, and a lot of people have been really excited about them for new applications, but they're also really useful for existing applications too. And I think we sort of overlook that when we get excited about new features, like, yeah, I can use that new router in my next application, or I can use that, respond with stuff when we rewrite it for version 3. And it's really something that you can, when you upgrade, most things will work on a code level. Most of the public APIs are the same. But I think there's a lot of refactoring that we need to do when we do this sort of thing because you're just building up technical debt. And you can also shave off some technical debt in the process. So you cut down on time spent maintaining stopgaps for added features. So things like XSS protection and a lot of the power that active relation is going to afford you. I know that I maintain a few hacks for that in some of my apps. You're going to remove that time that you've been spending maintaining that. And so, again, from a business perspective, that makes a lot of sense because you're spending less hours, therefore paying people less money, and yada, yada, yada. From a technical perspective, though, it ensures that new and better practices are baked right into what you're doing. So whereas you should have been escaping everything on Rails 2, now you are forced to escape everything. And so it's a lot less effort from the developer's perspective to get a better set of practices enforced on you without a lot of hassle. And finally, segmentation. And I know this is sort of like a little bit more technical perspective to it, but segmenting your app into little services has never been easier. And I really got turned on to this approach when I saw Corey Donahoe's presentation at the Ruby Hoedown last year, where he discussed building web applications with this in mind, like building them specifically to be little services that you connect together and wire up. And I thought that was really interesting, and so I started playing around with it, and I realized in Rails 3, it's actually a lot smoother than just connecting a bunch of Rack and Sinatra apps. It's a lot easier with the router, and so you can change from a simple monolithic, ad hoc kind of application to something that you can scale across a bunch of servers really easily. And in Rails 3, it's almost as simple as just changing a tiny little bit of code and changing that controller to, one of the things lower in the stack and adding some of the modules back in, and you're done. It just really depends on how you want to restructure things. And building custom components for developers has never been easier. You can plug in anywhere in that call stack. If you look on my blog post that's the intro to Rails 3, you'll see that they refactored a lot of the controller stack into these little classes that add a little bit more functionality and a little more functionality and a little more functionality. And if you pick one of those out of the stack and just kind of add what you need to it, you can have these custom components that are just mountable right inside your application. It's great. So that's my little spiel on why, from my perspective. And I'm sure there are a lot of other reasons, and probably not everyone's going to agree with these, but that's okay. These are why I've looked seriously at upgrading a lot of things to Rails 3. So how do we do it? It's not that scary. It does have some snags and sort of intricacies that you'll hit, and unfortunately I've found that a lot of these aren't documented anywhere yet, so I'm hoping to change that a little bit. So the first thing you probably want to do is go grab my Rails upgrade plugin. And what this does is it determines basically what you need to upgrade, and then sort of gives you hints or has scripts to help you do it. So you run rake Rails upgrade check, and it'll look over your application and tell you, okay, you're using these constants that are going away, your active record calls are out of date, your routes are bad, you're missing application.rb. It has all these checks in it that tell you what you need to do. And it's not extensive by any means. I mean, there are a lot of deprecations that it doesn't check simply because it would be very difficult to pick out of code without doing some sort of wild interpretation that would be probably more harmful than useful. So once you determine what you need to upgrade, it has these nice little scripts. So it takes your current 2.x app and runs Tesla, and then helps you create Rails 3 compatible code. And it'll also back up important files. So a big part of the upgrade process is to actually regenerate a Rails 3 app on top of your Rails 2 app. And you want to let it replace certain files because it'll update them. But you don't want to accidentally replace something you've done a lot of edits to, or you don't want to replace something that you need to make edits to, but you have a lot of important stuff in already. So you regenerate the Rails app on top of your current one. As Greg remarked, that's now a path as the argument rather than an app name. So Rails dot or Rails dot / will be fine. And it's the easiest way to get all the right pieces in. It generates a gem file, generates application.rb, and these will be empty and not very useful, but you can go back in and import all of your code that does need to be in there into it. So again, be sure you back up the important files. The first time I did this, I accidentally overwrote, I think it was application controller, something that had an important helper in, and it kept breaking my app, and I was wondering why this helper was broken, why is it broken, it didn't do anything special, and then I realized that the helper was not there any longer because I had replaced the file. So there is a task to do that in the plugin. I don't have it here, but you need to run rake Rails upgrade backup, and what that will do, it will take test helper, application helper, environment, things like that, and copy them to testhelper.rb.rails2, environment.rb.rails2, things like that. So the next step is to take these generated files and plug the code that needs to go into it from environment.rb or wherever it's coming from. So these two tasks actually take your config.gems calls from environment.rb and your routes, and will generate Rails 3 compatible versions of those for you to plug in. So you take the output from gems and put it in your gem file, and you take the output from routes and put it in your routes file. There's also one that's rake Rails upgrade configuration that will take a lot of the code that was in environment.rb but now belongs in application.rb and generate basically what your application.rb should look like. You move all your config.gem calls to gem file. The task will generate these new gem file code lines for you, but if you want to do it manually, there's documentation on that in the bundler README, and then you need to upgrade your routes file because otherwise it'll just puke. Right now it has a legacy mapper, but I found a couple of cases where it doesn't really cover it, but I was doing really crazy stuff anyhow, and it was really easy to upgrade them to Rails 3, so it wasn't a big deal. So next, you need to boot the app. If the app boots without totally pooping the bed, then you're in good shape. I had a couple apps that were basically, that was all I had to do. I just plugged the configuration in and then booted the app, and it worked perfectly fine. So that was great. And then you need to obviously run your tests. They don't have RSpec ready for Rails 3 yet, so obviously that's not going to work out if you're on RSpec. I'm seeing now they have pre-available. Yeah, I downloaded that, and I think it was a couple of weeks ago, and they don't have everything in there just yet. But I think they have controller specs and some of the model spec stuff in there. I don't really know exactly what they have done. But it's getting there, and it's much nicer than the RSpec 1.x series, in my opinion. So you should definitely go check that out. And then run the check again, because that will tell you, okay, you've gotten your routes upgraded, you've gotten all your configuration upgraded. Now you need to do this, this, and this to get your app cleaned up. The app, run your tests, unless you're using RSpec, and then run the task again. So now comes the time to fix your code. You very likely will have things that will just not work or are missing or have changed their API. In general, if they change the API, they will tell you, this takes a hash now or something like that, and it'll change your current code to work. Those will be going away. So if you see one, you need to fix it because it will probably be going away in a minor point release, or at the very least 3.1 will be gone. I know things like link to function have been biting a lot of people because it's just gone. So you need to install the legacy plugin for that. Ideally, you'd have tests to cover this sort of thing, so you should have caught it when you rake tested in the last step. But if not, then you'll probably have some very subtle bugs that you'll run into. So it's one of those things that you're going to have to step-by-step walk through it. Snags, you will hit them. And as I said, they're pretty much undocumented. There are some on the wiki, there are some on blogs. You just have to Google for your specific error. I really wish there was some sort of central repository for it. I'm really appreciative of the railsplugins.org thing that they've started because that should notate things that don't work in Rails 3 and plugins at the very least. But some of these more subtle errors are kind of difficult to deal with. So that's all I really have presentation-wise. I was hoping to have a pretty large question and answer time. So for more information on this stuff, the Rails 3 release notes and guides are great. The guides, a few of them have been updated, a few of them have not. I don't know if they've notated which ones have been updated for Rails 3 or not. I think they have. I don't remember. But anyhow, the release notes actually cover a lot of the things that are going to be a sticking point. edgerails.info is great. He doesn't have a lot up there yet, but that's Ryan Deigel. I don't really know how to say his last name. But he did the This Week in Edge Rails series, and it's it really looks to be a really, Deigel. Okay, Deigel, yeah. So it looks like it's going to turn out to be a really great blog when you get that sort of rolling. And there are also some great lists of links from railshub.com and mediumexposure.com. And there are some short URLs there for you to grab those because they're kind of long. But links. There's lists of links about information related to Rails 3. Yehuda's blog obviously is a great source of information. I forgot an element's name. Michael Windsor's blog is also excellent. He's been covering a lot of the stuff. He maintains all the mail and T-mail and helps integrate that into Action Mailer. So he has a lot of interesting things to say there, and he's been covering some of the other Rails 3 features. My blog, the OMG blog, LOL.com, I've been writing a series of posts on upgrading to Rails 3. I'm going to be posting another one of those this week, probably. And I'm also publishing an ebook, it's Rails Upgrade Handbook. If you go to that site now, you can kind of sign up to when it'll be available, which should be like Monday or Tuesday. It's about 100 pages, and it walks you through it, shows some case studies, gives you some really thorough checklists for deprecations and things that will break. And yeah, so it's going to be a lot more thorough than most stuff. So that's it. I'm opening the floor for questions now.
So Yehuda has been answering a lot of questions during the course of your presentation, but if people have additional questions for Jeremy. So Sven, you're asking Ruby 192 recommendation, preview 1, or head?
I think head is the current recommendation. Yehuda could probably answer that a little bit better. Yeah, he says head. So that's what I've been running. Preview 1 kept giving me seg faults, and I don't know if that's RVM's fault, my machine's fault, or 192's fault, but I just kept getting problems with it. So when I actually upgraded to head, then it worked fine.
And to clarify from a question 2 presentations ago, what is the deal with 191 then, which is the current stable release?
I think it's unsupported officially, but I would really recommend moving to 192. I haven't run into any instability with 192 head at all. I've been running it on a couple of things that aren't really important. I would recommend, moving Twitter to it or anything, but I would recommend using 192 over 191 actually in any version. So they fixed a lot of the bugs that they were hitting in 191. So, and I know some people run on 191 and they don't have any issues at all. And maybe it's just the set of requirements that I have, the gems and things like that. But I kept getting seg faults with it, or things just didn't work quite as planned. So I definitely recommend moving to 192 as soon as possible.
Okay, Rajesh Kumar asks, how are various gems catching up with 1.9?
I don't know about a lot of gems. I know that there was some app earlier. What was it? I don't remember that. Does it work with 1.9 or something like that? .com. That will actually
Ruby19.com. Yep.
Yeah. That actually runs the test suite for gems and projects and tells you if it actually works with 1.9. I know a lot of those things probably are just failing because of weird test unit things probably, but in general that should give you a really good idea of, is it Ruby19.com, of what's working and what's not. Do you guys need me to go back a slide? Is that what you're saying?
As someone asked earlier if you could post all of these links to your weblog.
Oh, sure, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I'll post actually my slide PDF and stuff up there too. I know it's going to be on the O'Reilly site, but I'll just put all this information in one place. Oh, post all this to my blog or post the link to my blog?
However you choose to interpret that.
Pardon my loud dogs. My wife is evidently home from work, so.
Excellent. So another question, Mike Moore, any other significant changes before 3.0 is released, or is it just bug fixes?
I think everything's fairly stabilized. I don't think they're planning on making any major changes or additions as far as I know. Again, Yehuda would probably be more of an authority on that, but I haven't heard them discussing any major changes. Somebody asked about the application namespace. Will it be possible to combine multiple apps? That's sort of the idea behind the mountable apps, is that your default application will be mounted, and then I think the idea is to mount other, Pomeranians, sorry, mount other applications alongside of it. So you'll have, a lot of other instances of Rails application running.
So if someone is in the middle of a, say, new Rails 2.3 project, would you recommend upgrading now or waiting until a final Rails 3 release?
If they're not running anything exotic, I would say go for it. If you don't have a lot of wild gems and plugin requirements, if you're writing a lot of code, it's not that incredibly complex of an application, then I would say go for it. I would, caution you against switching Ruby versions and all that. If you're running on 1.9 or 1.8.7 already, and your app is working fine, I would recommend at least giving the upgrade a shot. I don't think it's going to cause you too much hassle, especially if it's all new code. So I think what a lot of people are going to hit is they're upgrading 2.1 or 2.2 apps straight to 3.0, and they're going to be missing a lot of steps in between.
So now my dogs are barking in the background. I don't know if they heard yours or what, but mine also sound like rats, FYI.
I'm going to mute the phone while I'm walking by them really quick, so you can go ahead and ask another question, and I'll grab it when I get to the other side.
All right, let me scroll up here. So where are these other apps, Sinatra, Rails, etc., stored in the folder hierarchy?
In general, I think people have been putting them in lib, but I don't know that that's the best place. Lib's kind of meant for lib code, so it seems like maybe you could just create another folder, maybe that maybe even inside of lib. I don't know that is specifically for these mountable applications, and just add it to the load path. It seems like a little bit smarter solution to me than just sticking them inside of lib or vendor or something like that. Unless, of course, they are maintained by someone outside of your team or that specific application, in which case I would say maybe put it inside a vendor in its own folder or something like that.
All right. Ken Collins asks, as the author of the SQL Server Adapter, pointer links to requiring active record for testing in 3.0.
For a plugin or a gem requiring it? It shouldn't be any different.
Do you want to clarify, Ken? I don't know if you're talking to us or someone else. Ken? Oh, I do require now. No diff is okay. Okay, so it's no different is what you're saying.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay. I think this is really a question for Yehuda or someone else, but Yehuda says, ARES love on the way for 3.1, but what's the delay? Is ARES falling from grace?
Yeah, I would say that's more for Yehuda. I know at one point Rick Olson was giving some serious thought to what he could do with rewriting active resource. And he's done some work to that end with Faraday, I think that's the name of it, which is sort of like a multi-tenant HTTP library thing that would be a really great backend for an active resource rewrite. So we'll see if he picks up that charge and runs with it. But I'd be really excited to see that come out because it does need some extra love compared to how much attention's been paid to the rest of the framework, especially.
All right. Any way to set route precedence in engines? For example, app routes take precedence over engine routes or vice versa?
Not that I'm aware of and not that I've seen in the router code. There may be something that Yehuda knows about that I don't, but I haven't seen a way to do that yet. He says the app routes win and we need to fix it. And I agree with that. It does need to be something that's either at least flexible or there needs to be very defined boundaries as to what can take precedence over what.
Yeah, so he's agreeing with you there. Are there any published stats on exactly how much faster Rails 3 is that you could point to?
I think Yehuda has been the only person to publish some sort of micro benchmark. I haven't seen anything widespread yet, and I think it's largely because people see the beta tag and they're kind of like, oh, we don't want to put it up against Rails 2, which is stable. But I think it's a good comparison, and I think the benchmarks that I've seen on Yehuda's blog have been very promising. But they've largely been on the scale of milliseconds, whereas he's improving one section of the router or one section of action controller and actually benchmarking that little bit of code that he's looking at. I'm hoping that whoever did that really nice set of interpreter benchmarks for Rails 2 will actually take Rails 3 and do the same thing with it, because I'd be very interested in seeing the differences now on this set of code between Rubinius and JRuby and all these alternative implementations versus mainline 1.9.
All right. Any plans for better backwards compatibility now that 3.0 has seen extensive restructuring? So far, it seems every Rails release, even minor, is not fully compatible with the previous one.
Right, and that's a big part of what Yuhu was saying about the modularity is that now things should live longer because it's easier to segment them off into their own little world and not mess with anything. You can support a lot of the internal hacks for Rails 2 and Rails 3 simply because the code just doesn't exist anymore. And so I think making it more modular is going to make it easier to maintain backwards compatibility a little bit. Of course, DHH has said numerous times that he's not going to let backwards compatibility get in the way of progress in Rails. So, we'll just have to see, I suppose.
Okay. Someone asked about passenger support for Rails 3, and there were a bunch of answers saying that it works. So I'm running passenger with Rails 3, and
it's worked for me. I've deployed one app on Passenger, one that really deployed it, put it on Passenger, and it ran fine. So it is working. And I don't really know the mechanism for which it's working. I don't know if it's using the new rackup, the config.ru that's in the root of the Rails app, or if it's actually saying, oh, that's a Rails 3 app, and then booting it up and using all the normal Rails stuff that it normally uses. So I don't know exactly how it's handling that, but it does work.
All right. Any other questions for Jeremy? I'm going to take that as a no. So thank you very much, Jeremy.
Thank you.